In this video, we are going to show you how to replace your rear pads and rotors. Let's get started. The first thing you want to do is safely raise and support the rear of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After you've done that, continue on to removing all 6 of your 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Once you have the wheel off of there, continue on by reinstalling one of your lug nuts to hold the rotor in place. Let's move along to pushing back the caliper piston. This can easily be done with a small prying device. I'll carefully get in between the caliper and the front pad and gently start pulling. As you can tell, looking into this area, the piston is pushing into the caliper as it should. That's a good sign. Let's continue on to our rearward slider bolts. Now for these bolts, typically they're going to be a 10mm headed bolt. For our application, it's a 12. I'll continue on by removing the top bolt fully, give it a quick inspection, and then I'll reinstall it just a couple threads. By putting the bolt back in here, it makes sure that the caliper does not fall off while we continue. Now that we have that lower bolt out, continue on by fully removing the first bolt that you had started to remove. Now we can grab onto the caliper and we're going to roll it out from the bottom first and then pull it away. Up along the top, the outer pad has a little hook on it that holds it in place to the bracket. Let's set this aside. Now you can remove the safety lug nut from your rotor and remove the rotor from the vehicle. At this point, let's continue on to removing our brake pads from the caliper. If you were to look at the outer pad, you're going to see that it has a locking clip, and if you were to look into each of these holes, you'll find a tab that protrudes into the hole from the pad. Now all we want to do is carefully get in between this locking clip and the pad and gently separate it. Once you have that separated, the pad should be able to pull away from the caliper ear, and then you can slide it up. We'll do the same to the other side, and then remove that brake pad. I like to give them a quick inspection just to see how they've been wearing. This one looks okay. I'll set it aside. Now we can continue to the inner brake pad. For this one, you can just grab onto the pad and the outer ears and carefully squeeze. The inner pad has some tabs that go into the caliper piston. We'll give that pad a quick inspection as well to see how it's worn. That looks decent. Set it aside. Once you have the brake pads out of there, you're going to want to inspect along the seal where the piston is. You want to make sure you don't see any fluid coming out of this area. If you do, you have to replace the caliper. I'll continue on by fully pushing in my caliper piston. Give the piston one last check for fluid. That still looks good. The next thing you want to do is continue on to your slider pins. To remove the slider pins, you want to grab onto the caliper with your index finger along this ear. I'm going to push on the pin itself with my thumb and try pushing it out through the far side. Be careful not to ruin the boot. I'll pull the boot off of the pin, and then I can just go ahead and slide this right out. Once you have your caliper slider pin out of there, you want to give it a close inspection. This whole area right here needs to be a smooth surface so it can slide inside of the caliper. If it feels as though it's rusted or rotted in any way, you want to make sure you clean it up. Also, you want to pay special attention along where each of my fingers are. There's a small groove. Those grooves are where the caliper boots need to be. If those grooves are full of debris, you need to make sure you clean them out so the caliper boot can make good contact. Once you have the slider pin cleaned up, you're going to move along to cleaning out the inside of the boot and inspecting it. To clean the boot, you can easily do that with a rag. Take it, slide it through one side and out the other. Go ahead and clean it out, and then give it a thorough inspection for cracks, wear, or any type of damage. Once I have it through there, I just like to walk it around a little bit. You can see exactly how much dirt and debris is coming off of this. Squeeze the boot around there. After that, you can go ahead and take a peek. Make sure you get out as much of that existing grease as possible. And also give the boot a squeeze. Make sure it's soft and pliable and it's not torn or worn. That looks good. Do the same to the other slider pin. Continue on to some high temperature caliper lubricant. I want to try to get inside of the boot right here and make my way to where the ear is of the caliper itself. We want to lubricate that entire area so the slider pin can move as it needs to. Continue on to adding some lubricant to your slider pins. It's important to make sure you get some in the grooves at the end of each of the pins. Keep in mind, you don't have to add a whole bunch of lubricant to the pin itself because you did already lubricate inside the boot. Now, once you feel as though you get it in there, you need to make sure you go back and forth with it so the boot can sit inside the grooves on either side of the pin. Once it feels as though it moves freely, go ahead and clean up your mess and do the exact same thing to the other pin. Now that we have it cleaned up, let's continue on with that high temperature caliper lubricant, and we want to make sure that we lubricate the piston area right along here. Once you have that lubricated, continue on with the lubricant along the back side of each of these ears. This is going to help with vibration dampening and noise reduction overall. Now that I have that in there, it's going to be time to install the inboard pad. That's the one that has the 3 prongs protruding from the back side. We want to make sure we line up the prongs with the inner area of the piston itself. We'll carefully slide this into place, making sure we get no grease on the pad material itself. Should go in nice and tight. You want to hear an audible click, make sure it's secure. Now it's going to be time for the outboard pad. We'll have a look from the backside. We have those locking clips, the little areas that protrude outward that need to fit into the slots on the caliper itself. Now, something else I want to mention is this hooked area here, which is considered a locking tab, and this area right here, which is your wear indicator. You want to make sure you have the proper pad for the side of the vehicle you're working on. You can easily compare it to the original pad so you know exactly which one is which. Now, once you've found the proper pad, we'll continue with sliding it into place. I want to try to line up these areas that protrude out of the pad with the holes as I'm sliding it down. I'm going to listen for a click. There we are. Double check it, make sure it's completely secured in the brake pad. Clean and inspect the threaded area on your mounting bolts. Assuming they look good, go ahead and set them aside. Now we can move along to cleaning up the bracket that's attached to your rear differential. You'll notice on it you have 2 tins. Go ahead and pop that off of there. We'll get the other one off as well. Once you've removed those, you want to pay attention to the area where those tins were located. This is going to be the area where the pads need to ride, so it needs to be clean and smooth and free of any debris. Go ahead and sand it down and then lubricate it with some high temperature caliper lubricant. We'll also make sure we get along the backside here as well. We'll add some high temperature caliper lubricant. Now we can install our brand new caliper tins. Slide that right into place. Do the same to the other. Once you have that together, continue on to cleaning up the mating surface of your axle where your brand new rotor is going to sit. Continue on to cleaning up the areas in between your lug studs in the center area of the axle. Let's have a look behind this area. You're going to find the adjuster for your emergency brake shoes. It's important to note because when you put your new rotor on here, you want to make sure that you have the emergency brake shoes properly adjusted close to the rotor, not necessarily hitting it, because you don't want any drag, overheating, or damaging the emergency brake shoes, but you do want to make sure that the emergency brake works properly. To adjust this, you can use a small screwdriver or prying device and turn it one direction or the other. Now let's apply some copper never sees to the mating surface. Now it's time to prepare our brand new rotor. It's a good idea to make sure you clean all three braking surfaces. Let's take that brand new rotor and put it in place. The next thing we're going to do is hold the rotor up against the mating surface of the axle. Try to give it a little spin. We're listening for drag of those emergency brake shoes on the inside of the brake rotor here. If you can hear a little bit of drag but you don't feel much resistance, it's properly adjusted. If you don't hear anything, generally it means you have to adjust the shoes out a little bit, and if you can't turn it at all, you have to de-adjust the shoes. Once they're properly adjusted, continue on with one of your lug nuts. We'll put this on here to hold the rotor in place while we continue. Now it's time to mount the caliper. Before you slide it into place, there's a couple things to note. You want to make sure that you have your caliper slider pins slid towards the inboard side of the vehicle, not towards the pad, because you won't be able to put it over the bracket. Also, when we're doing this, putting it on, you want to make sure you start the top in first. Looking at the outboard pad along the top, that's where the hook is that goes over this bracket. And lastly, you need to pay attention to the flex hose right along this area. You want to make sure it's not twisted like a pigtail. That'll cause brake fluid restriction and hang up your brakes. Once you have the caliper in position, start in both of your mounting bolts, snug them up, and then torque them to 24 foot-pounds. At this point, you just want to double check your work. Make sure everything's torqued properly and that flex hose is definitely not twisted. Assuming that looks good, continue on to removing your safety lug nut and get ready to put on your wheel. Once we get it on there, we'll bottom out all 6 of the lug nuts, snug them up, get the wheel back on the ground, and torque them to 98 foot-pounds. With the wheels safely back on the ground, we'll torque these in a crisscross manner. Torqued. All right, I showed you how to do one side of your brakes. The process is going to be the exact same thing for the other side of the vehicle. After that, make sure you go ahead and pump up that brake pedal, make your way under the hood, double check your brake fluid. Go ahead and shut the hood and take it for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.